Hi everyone, this is Professor Fernandez, and I'm doing a quick screen share here because I wanted to talk about Elena by Pat Mora. I'm actually doing a Google Hangout instead of a Screen-O-Matic because I think I may take a little bit more than 15 minutes to talk about this poem. I really, really like this poem a lot. This is continues our assimilation and acculturation lesson. And last week we learned about Dia de los Muertos, and we learned about the culture behind it, the meaning behind the symbols. We learned its origins and where it came from originally. And we learned that that is a prime example of acculturation where two cultures are come together and create something big, so something bigger than itself, or cultures are actually existing one way, shape, or form. There's very little alteration, and that's a simplistic way of looking at Dia de los Muertos. Um, Much respect um, the um, to the indigenous who were sacrificed for this acculturation to happen. So I don't say that lightly. I want to talk about Elena and Now and Then America. I'm going to talk about Elena first, and I'll do a separate video for Now and Then America. These two poems um, are interesting. They're both by Pat Mora, and if you've had me for 1302 before, I've used a Pat Mora poem before. Um, this now talks about assimilation and really more about the cost of assimilation, kind of like the effects of assimilating and what you have, the price you have to pay in order to assimilate to a more dominant culture. So I'm going to start off by reading this poem to you. Um, because it's a pretty short poem and I'd like to do a live dissection of this. Now, as I'm reading, I'm going to read it first, and then we're gonna do some breaking down here of this poem. Um, and I'm going to say my disclaimer that I'm going to break down the poem, but I'm not breaking down every single bit. I'm breaking down a large chunk of it, I think, or a sizable chunk of it, but not breaking down all the hidden meanings behind everything. There are some things that you all have to do yourselves, but I will lead you down the path of interpreting this poem. So let's talk about Elena by Pat Mora. My Spanish isn't good enough. I remember how I'd smile listening to my little ones, understanding every word they'd say, their jokes, their songs, their plots. Vamos a pedirle dulces a mamá. Vamos. But that was in Mexico. Now my children go to American high schools. They speak English. At night they sit around the kitchen table, laugh at one another. I stand at the stove and feel dumb, alone. I bought a book to learn English. My husband frowned, drank more beer. My oldest said, Mama, he doesn't want you to be smarter than he is. I'm 40. Embarrassed at mispronouncing embarrassed at the laughter of my children, the grocery, the mailman. Sometimes I take my English book and lock myself in the bathroom, say the thick words softly, for if I stop trying, I will be deaf when my children need my help. So we've got a lot of stuff here. Let's start with this beginning part because you can almost take this poem and almost split it right here. You can talk about life in Mexico um, and life after Mexico. Um, so if you know a little bit about Pat Mora is from El Paso, and it's a city on the border, and so they live between two cultures in El Paso, between an Anglo culture and a Mexican culture, um, where you may not speak Spanish good enough, you may not speak English good enough either, or well enough, I should say. So this first line is really interesting because when she's talking about my Spanish isn't good enough, she's already an outsider here. An outsider, but it's kind of okay because she's smiling in the next one, right? Um, and being an outsider could mean language, it could mean customs, it could mean experience. Um, and that um, has to somehow balance itself out because you can't live as an outsider forever, as much as many people may try. So we know that it's okay, even though she doesn't know Spanish well enough. She still smiles, she still listened to her children, and she would still understand every word that they would say. She still understood what was going on. She understood like the important parts, the jokes, the songs, their plots. Pretty much, she could be a mom. She could be an effective mom. She could take care of her children, right? And she was surrounded by that in Mexico. So it wasn't anything that she couldn't do. She could be effective. She could be herself. Um, Even here, like her children could even say, let's ask mom for some sweetbread, or sorry, ask mom for some sweets, for some candy. Come on, let's go. So it was very, this kind of scene here is very it's very idyllic, right? Nothing could happen. All things are well. That's the ordinary world. If you remember, kind of your thought from 1302. But then she tells us this was in Mexico. This idyllic life that I've lived here with my children in Mexico. And so this really signifies a change here, a kind of a shift, right? And this change here, or the shift, is kind of to show you like a before and after. Before, I didn't really have to do any assimilation in order to become a parent to my teacher, to a parent to my children. Um, but now there's this shift, there's this change now, and I have to change. So she talks about now her children go to American high schools, and I think it's kind of interesting here how what she is capitalizing here. I'm not looking so much right here at the capitalization at the first letter of each line. That's pretty standard for poetry. It changes here, and we can talk about that when we get down here in a minute. But it's pretty standard for poetry, even though it's the line break is in the middle of a sentence, like here. At night they sit around the kitchen table, laugh with one another. Kitchen, she broke it right at kitchen and capitalized it. So it's relatively standard that they capitalize the first line of the um, the first letter of each line's kind of a standard thing. What's more interesting is the break of the line. But I want to go back to the capitalization. We have high schools that it's capitalized here. We have vamos is capitalized here as the beginning of a sentence. She did not break the line here. She broke the line in the at the next sentence, or she started the next line as a sentence. So she didn't do this, right? She kept it on the same line. So she had a capitalization here. And let me see if I can highlight this, if I remember how the highlighting goes here. Of course I don't. Um, so she had, let's highlight with that. Um, so she had vamos here, and that's capitalized. American is usually highlighted, but high schools is not. And whenever you capitalize something, you want to capitalize it because it's either a proper noun. But in poetry, you're wanting to capitalize things because it's there's emphasis here. I'm gonna highlight English. Usually, English as a subject is capitalized, um, and as a language, it's usually capitalized. But this is an interesting capitalization here in the middle of this sentence, and we'll come back to that in a minute. Here, English as well is also capitalized, so I'll highlight that. So here we are with some highlights here. Um, and that would be my sister lamenting the Texans game. Um, so we have the capitalizations here of these words here, and she wants to emphasize high schools here. It's not. primary school, it's not middle school, high school is important here because during high school is where you have this shift in being an adult here, right? Um, they want to say it's college, but sometimes adult things happen here. You change, you formulate ideas, and you formulate opinions. Um, you start dreaming and looking into the future. So high school is full of promise, and that's a reason to emphasize high schools and capitalize this. They speak English, period. Very short declarative sentence here. Um, and so you have Spanish, English kind of battling against each other. At the top of the idyllic section, we talk about Spanish. At the top of the change, we talk about English. So you have these two languages battling for attention here in this poem. And then you have this wonderful counter, still idyllic, but kind of counter idyllic. At night, they sit around the kitchen table, laugh with one another, similar to their jokes, their songs, their plots. So this situation here about them being at the kitchen table and laughing at one another, it's idyllic for her children, but it's not idyllic for her, not at all. So she's highlighting this situation in comparison to this one. So we have some contrast here before the change and after the change. And then here is where she comes to a realization that now she feels alone. Where before her Spanish wasn't good enough, but she was still able to be a mom. Here at the time that's the most crucial for her children, which is high school, where they start formulating ideas and dreaming about the future, where they probably need her the most, she cannot relate to her children. So we have the first cost here of assimilation. If you don't assimilate, um, you're going to lose your children. And that's kind of a harsh thing to say, but that's kind of the interpretation I have here. So you have the first cost of assimilation. It's like use it or lose it situation. So we have her here trying to assimilate, trying to be a good mom. And then you have another kind of conflict here. So you've got conflict with the here, I feel dumb. You have this other conflict with her husband who is not about that life. And so he doesn't want to assimilate. And so here's another cost of assimilation. Cost number two, her husband, who is not about that life. He as far as we can tell from the context of this poem, and he kind of frowns at her trying to um, take this step. And in fact, he just kind of shies away from it, right? He's disapproving of it. So that's the second cost of the assimilation. And so you have the um, oldest the oldest, saying he doesn't want you to be smarter than he is. And that continues with the whole cost of assimilation. Because, and I'm glad that we have this here. This is a context for this action that happened here with the husband frowning and drinking more beer. And like the child is really putting in context. The child that needs her, the child that is already assimilating to this new culture that's not from Mexico, or that isn't a Mexican culture, assimilating to American culture through high school. It's saying he doesn't want you to be smarter than he is. So this poem is relating um, assimilation with intelligence, or the wanting of assimilation, I should say. I guess an intelligent thing to do. Um, you should be trying to learn English, mom. Like, we need you, right? Um, so we have embarrassment and embarrassment here, mispronouncing words at the laughter of her children. Um, and I know that you guys are pretty young and don't know what it's like to be 40 as one who is about to approach this age. By 40, you're kind of set. You're set with your life. You want to be at 40, kind of, living your life, or taking a next step that is pretty calculated. You are middle aged or approaching middle age. I guess we live longer now, so middle age would be a little bit longer. But 40, you're raising your children and you're getting them ready for life. And so the last thing you want to do is learn something new, right? So this is why it's embarrassing to go back to the beginning and try to learn a whole other language that isn't your own, a whole other world that isn't your own. Um, as she's saying here, the grocery, the mailman, sometimes I take my English book and lock myself in the bathroom and say the thick words softly. Like this is embarrassment here. And this is her kind of going back to the start. And that's why it's another difficulty here. She's starting over. She has these costs of assimilation. She has the cost of not being able to talk and know about her children, possibly moving past her significant other. um, but this is also a third one, this idea that if she doesn't, she's going to stay where she is. Starting over for her is the third cost of assimilation. And then you have the last line, which is pretty deep here. For if I stop trying, I will be deaf when my children need my help. And then this is kind of a deciding, very concluding line here, um, that she has no choice. She has to pay the price to assimilate to this culture, to assimilate to this language, to be the mom and the person she has to be. So she's going to have to start over to live this life, to be the good mom, and to be the spouse that passes the other spouse. Those are the prices that she has to pay in order to be able to help her children when they need her. Um, and so these are the stakes. This is what is at stake here. And so she makes a decision that this is what I have to do. This poem plays with persona. Um, the persona here, and I don't want you to say that this is Pat Mora and her life. We don't know nothing about her life. Um, Elena is a persona. And a persona is essentially the poet putting on a mask, exploring an issue or exploring a thought through a kind of like a character in the poem. So Ellen is a character in this poem, and you can almost say she is like the idyllic 40-year-old woman who is assimilating into the culture. She's Mexican, and they are here now. Her children may be Mexican American, um, and they are running gangbusters. They can like have a whole conversation, and they can read books, and they can know the whole thing. They can move in this culture in a way that she can't, and will probably never be comfortable moving. Um, so Elena is in every woman in this case. And so through that persona, we get to talk about and explore assimilation from the eyes of someone who has to go through this process, and what it was like before and what it's like after. So that's kind of the breakdown. That's the beginning of the breakdown. You can go a lot deeper of this poem. This poem is extremely layered, so I recommend you read it a couple of times. Um, Read it one time, go through interpretation, sit it down, go back the next day, read it again, and interpret it further. Um, it's quickly has become one of my favorite poems in the course. So I hope you enjoyed it. I know that I enjoyed talking to you about it. I hope you enjoyed my sister being upset about the Texans' loss in the background. I don't know if you heard her, but I sure did. And so I will see you guys later.